recorded from a dark cellar on a Fancy Expert Thursday. It's Fancy Expert Thursday Business Pants. It is November the 9th of 2023. Today, we're dropping our full hour-long interview with the exceptional, the godmother of governance, the queen of the proxy castle, Nell Minow. We'll cover in the interview the anti-woke, the history of ISS and the corporate library, how some things have changed, how some things haven't. It's all here, but no more from me. Here's Nell.
We have the great Nell Minow on the show today. Nell, I found so many different ways of... Wait. Hold on, I'm getting there. I have so many different ways to describe her. Allow me to hit my list. Here we go. And okay. You guys can choose which one you prefer. And yes, Matt, you do have a vote here.
An early game. I like
the queen of good. The queen of good corporate governance from Business Week. Although I always called you the queen of corporate governance. Period. I didn't know it was good corporate governance. Right. I didn't know there was a distinction.
Like the good witch.
Yeah.
You know.
Exactly. Yeah. We could describe you by your Lifetime Achievement Awards from ICGN, Corporate Secretary. I know you just entered some kind of Hall of Fame with one of our frequent guests, Doug Cha, right? You're in some Hall of Fame now?
Yeah. Yes, we are. Yep, that's also the Corporate Secretaries. That one is especially dear to my heart because it's one thing if the people who are on your side give you awards, but when the people that you're fighting with give you awards, that's kind of sweet. No,
that's not. Yeah, you're not just in the echo chamber. You're in the other chamber, whatever that's called. Yeah, the movie mom, of course, which is how most people around, at least in Portland, the corporate library, they like to refer to you as the movie mom. You're co-founder of the corporate library and GMI ratings. Anything else I'm missing on that list? Okay, so you are a co-founder of ISS with Bob Monks.
Yeah.
And then you're currently vice chair at Value Edge Advisors. But is there a better way to describe you? How do you announce yourself usually?
Usually I just say I'm an advocate for shareholders.
Okay. Queen of shareholder advocacy.
Oh, see, you added the queen. Nell's way is much more succinct.
So again, thanks for joining us. So I sent to you yesterday that we're going to kind of break this up into three parts. We're going to have a big general discussion about just sort of ESG. So that could go anywhere, but I know Matt and I are kind of keen to go back a little bit too. He just had your textbook in his hand, so I think Matt's feeling a little bit historical. But then we'll just do like we do with a lot of our guests. We'll play a couple of silly games. I have in honor of Succession, which I think is kind of the pinnacle of ESG in pop culture programming. I have a few Succession-like movies, TV shows that I'd like to get your thoughts on. And then we have at the very end, we have a game, the same game we play with John Lukomnik. Just want to get your reactions to some, I call it the quick and dirty, nerdy, agree or disagree corporate governance game, just to get your reaction about just some of the lingering things in corporate governance that Matt and I talk about repeatedly. Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Pithy names for everything. The quick and nerdy, dirty, girdy.
We're trying to make ESG and corporate governance seem interesting. Okay, this is our goal here at this company. It's a struggle.
It's a high bar. Yeah.
So let's start. And Matt and Nell, both of you. I mean, this is not like it doesn't have to be a structured thing. So feel free to take this into conversation mode. But let's start. I want to start with the corporate library because that's where I was born in the corporate governance world and. Founded around 2000. I mean, can we at least go back and do you have any distinct? I'm really calling it like the birthplace of corporate governance, the kind of the birthplace of ESG. Do you have any distinct memories you at least like to share from that time?
Well, I have to go back a little earlier than that.
Go ahead.
I met Bob Monks when we were both working in the government. He was at a much higher level. He was working directly with the then Vice President, George H.W. Bush. I was working at the Office of Management and Budget, and we hit it off. We got along very well. And I was pregnant with my second child and not really wanting to stay in my current job. I wanted to work part-time. And he said, well, I'm starting this new company, Institutional Shareholder Services, and we're going to guide large institutional investors on corporate governance. And of that sentence, I was familiar with the words guide and the, but I didn't know anything about any of the other words. And certainly none of the things that I have done in the world of corporate governance ever came up when I was in law school. Nothing at all like what I learned in law school. So he explained it to me and said I could work part-time and said, and I said to myself, well, this is great. It's never going anywhere. The entrenched interests and the corporations will never let this move forward. And we can have a lot of fun, and we can be on the side of the good guys and write some interesting op-eds and file some amicus briefs. And I'll work part-time forever because it's never going to get off the ground. Well, Bob Monks was and is an incredible visionary. He was 100% right. We hit the ground just as the world of corporate governance was beginning. And the reason for that was that there was like a crash of two different forces on the same railroad track, rushing at each other. One of them was the rise of the large institutional investor, the mutual funds, the pension funds, the index funds, which made all of a sudden a group of shareholders who were big enough and smart enough and stuck enough to care about the issues that were put to them on proxy cards. And the other was because of the creation of securities that could make any size of transaction possible, including a lot of hostile transactions, you all of a sudden had this huge number of abuses of shareholders. Right. So it doesn't really matter that much if all you're voting on is reelect the board of directors, approve the auditors. But if all of a sudden you've got all these very thorny issues about golden parachutes and greenmail, you've got a bunch of investors who, as I said, are big and stuck and smart, and they're fiduciaries. They have to do a good job. All of a sudden, they were saying, like, where is the independent guidance that we can get on these issues? So Bob was just an incredible visionary right from the beginning, and that was the creation of ISS. And when we sold ISS, we sold the other company we started, an investment fund.
Lens.
The part that we really liked the best, that was Lens, yeah. The part we really liked the best was our in-house research. And we said, let's keep that part. And we'll give it, because our reputations at that time were very, that we were very conflict oriented. We said, we'll give it the most boring name we can think of, the most boring institutional name we can come up with. And Rick Marshall came up with the name, the Corporate Library. Yeah. And so that's how it got called the Corporate Library. And I said, okay, something I've always wanted to do is look at CEO employment contracts, which are public, but nobody ever looks at them. So let's do two things. We'll write to all the companies and we'll say, could you send us your CEO employment contract? And we'll grade them on how quickly they respond. And we'll evaluate the contracts. And we did. And I was thinking I'd made a terrible mistake because they were all essentially drafted by the same two lawyers. They all were identical until we got one that was so horrible. I said, we have a winner. This is the worst.
Do you remember who that was?
Of course I do. It was a Global Crossing. Global Crossing, right, yeah. And that one had not only was the make and model of the Mercedes he was being given as nice. Spelled out, and not only was he had to move from the East Coast to the West Coast, as one often does. You have to move when you have a new job. Sure. Well, they were going to pay all his expenses. That's fine, but they were also going to fly his family out to visit him once a month, first class, including his mother. This is all in the contract. They're going to
first class, yeah.
His mom. Wow.
Visit him. Yeah. But the part which I knew the mother thing would be fun, but the part that really got me was that they were giving him 2 million options at $10 a share below market. So,
which was okay.
Yeah, options that options are supposed to align your interests with the shareholders.
Right. Yeah, above market.
Above market.
was the point.
Exactly.
But there's nothing illegal about that, right? I mean, it's technically okay.
And
okay,
it was proposed. Yeah, sure. Of course, it was terrible. So that's between him and the IRS. It's not illegal. So That became later on the 11th biggest bankruptcy in the history of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So that made us look smart.
It was all the trips from his mom. I mean, it was like
Yeah.
80% of it.
As I said at the time, I'm a mom, and we moms love it when our boys want to spend time with us.
Yeah.
But we're not proud of them when they externalize those costs onto the shareholders.
Mm-hmm.
That's what all my mom says. Yeah.
Yeah, I say that all the time to my son. So anyway, that's how the corporate library got started. And then later we merged with a couple of, or bought a couple of other companies and took the name.
So before the corporate library started to build a database and start actual ratings, what was the original intention? Just a place to do research? Kind of you wanted to kind of write articles and write letters, that kind of a thing? Or did you, at that point early on, did you think you were going to want to rate companies, and like what was the intention?
Well, my dream ever since I had been at ISS was to rate boards of directors like bonds. There was a idea that you just automatically vote for the board, but of course the board is picked by and paid by and informed by the CEO, and some of them are better than others. When I first got into this business, it's hard to believe, but O.J. Simpson was on 5 boards.
Yeah, definitely.
And was one
Comcast,
half of
right?
the audit committee. Yeah, he was on the audit committee of one of
Mm-hmm.
them.
Right.
Even know anything more about auditing, than a toddler. So that would be the kind of thing that I would explain to the shareholders. I say this should be a risk factor for you. If somebody puts O.J. Simpson on the audit committee, that isn't because he wants the audit committee to do a good job.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there were a number of people who were on 10 boards, and that was not good either. So I said, they have to tell you whether they attend at least 75% of the meetings. And if they don't, maybe that's something we should respond to in some way. So I said,
Sure.
So the corporate library really began with this idea that we were going to rate boards of directors in terms of the risk that they provide for an investor. Well, we couldn't get any investors interested in it, but we did get, I thought this was the greatest market test in the world, the director and officer liability insurers interested.
Right.
And we were very good at predicting bad. We were not good at all predicting good. But if you can tell people what are the riskier investments, if you can explain that to them, that in addition to the traditional indicators that they look at, that they've got, the O.J. Simpson problem or something like that, that's of value. And my dream was that the D&O liability insurers would walk into the boardroom and say, well, we're raising your premiums because Nell says you're a terrible board. And
I love that.
And that kind of happened. So so that was the corporate library, and that was we did that for quite a while.
I don't like how do you feel that basically the Global Crossing? I just read a proxy in which the CEO gave himself $0, but $450 million worth of options, and his annual salary looks like it's $30,000 a year or something.
Right.
But he gets $450,000 in private security a year, and then $450 million in options. Basically, Global Crossing is the template for the modern contract. Yeah.
Well,
and
it's amazing to me that the people that we pay the most in the whole world don't want to pay for anything themselves. I mean, seriously, the man has got enough money to pay for his own his Mercedes. His at one company we had two housekeepers in the man's home.
It was in his contract.
It's in the contract.
Yes, it's in the contract.
Wow.
It was hidden. What they'd said was that there would be 2 employees of the company who would be assigned to his home for hygiene purposes.
Yeah.
And that was his maid.
And what I don't even understand the rationale there. Why not just increase the salary or increase the bonus and not tell us what he's up to in his home?
Exactly. I don't understand that at all. The richest people in the world are also, in a way, the cheapest people in the world, because at some point, I mean, this is just sort of behavioral economics. At some point, when you can buy everything in the world, the most valuable thing to you is something you can't buy or something you don't have to buy. And so there are all kinds of weird things. I think probably the worst, and this is actually the thing that got me interested in employment contracts, is that when we were at Lens, we would invest in companies that that was an investment fund. And we would invest in companies that, as my parents used to say about me, were not living up to their potential. Mm-hmm. And we would go in and try to make governance changes so that they would do better. And we did very well on that and sold it in 2000. But anyway, one of the companies we invested in, this is the only time this ever happened to me. I got a call from a portfolio manager on Wall Street who was also invested in the company. And he said, have you seen this guy's his pay? And I said, yeah, I read the proxy. He went without a bonus because the company didn't meet its goals. I thought that was actually pretty good. He said, ugh, you know, the month after the proxy was printed, they adopted a new contract with him. Did you see that? And I said, no. And he said, I'm faxing it to you. This was a while ago. So he faxed it to me, and standing in the room with the fax machine, I read it as it came off, and then I immediately faxed it to the New York Times, which printed it, and he was fired a month later. So here's what was in his contract. As I said, they hadn't met their goals. The stock was tanking, and he was awarded, first of all, his homes and the taxes on his 2 homes were going to be paid for by the company. Because he needed them to do his job, as opposed to the rest of us who just have our homes as a hobby or something. Right. Okay, fine. But also, he had a 5-year pay or play. So he was fired, but he did get the full 5 years, the present value. But the thing that really blew my mind was that he got a boatload of stock options at a strike price to be named later.
Oh.
So they were going to wait to see how low the stock was going to go before they decided.
Who was this?
This was CEO. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to think about it for a minute. I'll have to tell you later. Okay. I can't remember the name of the company right now.
Wow.
But here's the thing: I mean, like, Global Crossing effectively becomes a template for future employment contracts that we're seeing still today. Like with their insanity, it's just kind of backwards insanity, and the dream of rating directors, right? Which we are currently trying to do ourselves now, like years and years later. We're still getting the same reactions that you got. Investors aren't interested, and the directors of that board okay the contract and then fire him. Has anything changed? I mean, like, I know things have changed in terms of like things get disclosed more, but it does seem like there's a certain entrenchment in the expectations of directors and CEOs, and that hasn't really.
You know, I have a very Dickensian best of times, worst of times feeling about it, because as I think back on Bob and me in the early days of ISS, because it took us 3 years before we got any client other than Bob's college friend who took pity on him.
We need some college friends, Matt.
Apparently that's what we're missing.
Yeah. And so we had a lot of time to talk about things and say, how will we know if we've succeeded?
Sure.
And one of the ways was that corporate governance would be taught in business schools and law schools. That certainly has happened. But overall, I would say that boards are vastly better than they were.
No, there's no doubt.
No, we don't have the O.J. Simpsons. We don't have the museum director who was on the risk committee at was it Lehman Brothers. We don't have, so all of that vastly better. There was a brief period where directors were getting retirement plans. You don't need a retirement plan from a part-time job. Thank goodness for the wonderful shareholder activist Bill Steiner. He knocked all of those out in the pace of a couple of years. So, and investors are vastly more engaged, more interested, more aware of these issues than they ever were. So all of that, very good. I just read something about how investors are really pushing back on golden parachutes. Good for them. Thanks to Sarbanes-Oxley and Dodd-Frank, yes, we have better disclosure, but we also have more shareholder power. Shareholders have say on pay. It may not be a lot, but it's a little. And there are many more shareholder proposals. So I think in some ways things are a lot better. Certainly with regard to CEO pay. I mean, I laugh now when I think that the first CEO pay plan I ever complained about was $11 million, which is chump change today.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about CEO pay specifically because it does seem to be the one area that the popular culture has caught up to. Like you see it in the vernacular of it's the one element of corporate governance of ESG that people it really just it gets their attention, right? And in fact, in the United Auto Workers strike against the Ford, GM, and Stellantis, they use CEO pay ratio as a way to kind of get at the emotions of regular people. So
the SAG and Writers Guild.
Right, exactly. Right. And Netflix was an easy target there because they have two co-CEOs making hundreds of millions of dollars. But
no.
So
they have two co-CEOs and an executive
and a founder.
chair founder.
Right, that's
like
true.
They're basically
That's true.
3 CEOs.
So my question is then why do those totals? They keep just astronomically rising at this very steady pace. And even though there's a mechanism in the annual meeting for shareholders to show up, and I know that they're not binding, unfortunately, but why can't we get any control over this? It's like, because you're right, because when you look at boards, and Matt and I always joke about like the boards in the United Kingdom because they're so boring because they really do corporate governance well. And from an analyst perspective, I got nothing to complain about, which sucks for me. But why pay? Why can't we do anything with pay? What's the deal there? I don't understand it.
Yeah, that is a problem. But it goes back to what I already said. Who picks the board of directors? The CEO. Who pays the board of directors?
And who picks the compensation committees?
Who picks the compensation committees? I remember I was talking to a CEO some years ago, and I asked him about his board, and basically what he said was he had 9 white men and a black woman professor of diversity studies. And I said, I hope she's not on the compensation committee. And he said, yeah, of course she is. You know, why wouldn't she be? And so, you know, that's the problem. What I have said over and over is that nobody should be allowed to serve on a board unless you can get at least 50% of the shareholder vote. And if we can't vote off directors who overpay the CEO, you know, you have somebody like Ken Langone who served on the compensation committees of 3 of the most outrageous pay plans in history. If we can't vote those people off the island, then we'll never see a change. But now it's a closed loop.
Do you have any do you have any insight as to why we can't seem to vote off those people? So we just covered yesterday a company called Biotechne, where 65% of shareholders voted against Say on Pay, which is incredible. But one thing we always look at, we cover this almost weekly, is that none of these shareholders targeted the compensation committee that has been coming up with these terrible pay plans year after year. In fact, Matt, we have potential clients pushing back on us saying, you know, we don't want you to rate directors. We think you're being a little too aggressive. We don't want to offend directors. So you have any insight as to what's going on?
Why is everyone a snowflake?
I just don't, we just don't understand. I mean, and why wouldn't, I said a lot of things. Why wouldn't investors at least target the compensation committee if they're so angry at the pay plan?
I completely agree with you. And I have said over and over to institutional shareholders, if you're voting against the pay plan, vote against the comp committee. Otherwise, it's not meaningful at all. Yeah. Also said, when I have spoken to securities analysts, why isn't this a bigger factor? Since it's the single best predictor of bad results, why don't you look at CEO pay? Because the less sensitive...
Is that right?
Performance. Yeah, the less sensitive it is to performance, the worse performance we get.
Right.
And that's been proven over and over and over and over. So I don't really know. I will say this, as much as I love the institutional shareholder community, generally speaking, unless you're Ackman or ICANN or somebody like that, you don't go into that line of work if you like to be out front and you like to rattle the cages and you like to make changes.
But even when given data, so like what we are trying to do now, right? Like we have performance attribution for individual directors. So we can tell you which directors historically have paid CEOs more, for instance, on every board they've ever been on over the course of their careers. And when presented the data in advance, right? Like as in saying, well, they are not paying the CEO a lot now, but you just added a director who has a history of paying a lot.
I went to that person.
Yeah, like, I mean, like there's so much that's obvious when you just, now you have a data set in front of you, and we are told routinely that like the data, we don't have enough data, you know, like ISS, we get told now ISS and Glass Lewis are black boxes. And, you know, but when presented the data, they say, wow, that feels really aggressive. And it's like, I don't like it feels as if institutional investors have decided that we all live in, you know, Prairie Home Companion where everybody's above average and, you know, all the women are strong. And it's like 96% is the average vote for a director. Oh, yeah. I can't gel. It's like, it's easier to be reactive than proactive. I know that. But when given the data, even then it seems like investors there's like to your point about behavioral economics, there's like a social game happening that happens off balance sheet.
Listen, this is a related, not direct answer, but I was once arguing with a woman who her entire family were blue collar workers. They were by no means, you know, they were barely in the middle class, and she was voting for people who wanted to cut taxes for the wealthy. Mm-hmm. And I asked her about that. And I said, you know, these proposals to tax billionaires are not going to affect you in any way. They will benefit you because you will perhaps pay fewer taxes, but the taxes will go for communities and all kinds of good things. In fact, one of her daughters-in-law was a teacher. I said, this is what taxes do. And she said, but someday my son could be a billionaire.
Right.
I mean, yeah,
So
I rode a unicorn to work today.
Yeah. It's subverting the American dream in some way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so I think there's sort of that cowboy ethos. But believe me, what you're asking has been a big frustration in my life since I've been in this field, because I am somebody who is an advocate. I do speak out. I do want to rattle cages. I do want to change things. And it's very, very hard to get, you know, to move the sleeping elephant.
I want to jump to a different topic. And the reason why I started with the corporate library, because I kind of wanted, you know, to now that we're 20 years later, at least from the corporate library, but even further from, of course, when you met Bob, the anti-ESG, anti-woke movement, we don't really know what to call it over here. This is a topic that we didn't think we would be covering when we started our company, but now, of course, it is a weekly occurrence. And I know you testified in front of Congress recently. Matt and I watched together and loved your testimony. But quick thoughts on the anti-ESG movement? Like,
okay, it's not.
Could have you predicted it? Yeah, go ahead.
Look, it calls itself an anti-ESG movement.
Well, I'm calling it that. I don't know. Yeah,
that's fine. It calls itself an anti-ESG movement in the same way the anti-reproductive rights people call themselves pro-life. It's a fake term, and It has nothing to do with anything. And even the people who call themselves anti-ESG are pretty much okay with G and some of S.
Well, that's the joke. Yeah, that's our joke, is that they are ESG analysts. They're just,
of course they are.
Yes.
Assign different weights to all of the facts. And of course that's true. And, you know, who is one of the biggest, in terms of rhetoric, one of the biggest anti-ESG figures is presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. Yeah. But his financial disclosures show that his personal investments are very ESG oriented. So he started an anti-ESG fund, which is underperforming, and he started an anti-ESG proxy advisory service, which, as far as I can tell, only has one client. And as far as I asked them for a copy of one of their analyses, but they didn't send it to me. Mm-hmm. And I've been told their analysis is just vote with management. That's what they're promoting. So, you know, it's just completely phony. It is hugely funded by the fossil fuel companies. And it is absolute baloney. And I have testified before Congress many, many times. I'm used to being asked very tough questions. I enjoy that because, to be honest with you, I do this stuff 24/7. They do it 1 week out of the year.
It shows. And can I just say, it definitely shows in those hearings. Yeah.
Yeah. But in this case, they didn't ask me hard questions. They just pretended I wasn't there. And every time the four men who were testifying on behalf of the Republicans said things that were absolutely not true, I would say, well, actually, for example, they would say, they love this term, they would say Glass Lewis and ISS are a duopoly and no one can compete. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, as a side hustle, set up this competitor. So obviously that's not true. I said, I've done it before. I could set up one in 2 weeks.
Right.
And it would be easier now than it was when we did it, because believe it or not, we had to get everything on paper. They didn't have everything online. We had to get the proxy statements and mail our analyses out on paper. We had a Xerox machine going all the time. So it's a lot easier to do it now. And also the industry's been established. It's a lot easier. I said that's ridiculous to say that's a duopoly. Or, so and they would talk about the incredible burdensome of shareholder proposals. And I would say, give me an example of a shareholder proposal that you think is not legitimate to be voted on by the shareholders. They don't have one.
You threw out a stat during the congressional hearing about you're really talking about 2% of all proposals, 98% are just directors. And you're talking about it for the top 50 companies,
the biggest companies in the world.
Only, right?
Yeah.
These are the people who are the most well-funded. So when you're talking about the difficulty in responding to a shareholder proposal, you're talking about who? Amazon's difficulty or what? What are we talking
exactly.
about?
Exactly. That's what their lawyers are there for. And when they say, it's self-reported. They say it costs us this amount of money to respond to these things. That's not an audited figure. I think they just made it up. So,
the number they made up, actually, frankly, was something like $150,000 or $600,000. It was less than $1 million per proposal to companies that literally are making billions and billions a second. Right?
Well,
what are we talking about?
But why wouldn't you want to know what your shareholders think?
Yeah.
It's non-binding. Worst thing that could happen is 100% of your shareholders vote in favor of the proposal, and then you go tell them, go back home. We'll see you next year.
Which they do.
It's absolutely ridiculous. And what's particularly galling to me is that the Republican Party, which is supposed to stand for free markets and economic rationality, is promoting this sort of nanny state idea that the smartest financial experts in the world are so ignorant and lazy that they cannot evaluate what
this is what makes our head spin constantly. I guess it's the true irony to me is that one of the pioneers of corporate governance came from the Reagan administration. And enough said there. That's Bob Monks. And now we're flash forward to the future, and the party of Reagan is now trying to bring corporations to its knees. It's a funny irony,
But
both working. I'm a Democrat, but we met working in the Reagan administration.
Right.
I mean, credit where credit is due here, because Vivek was on our show before he announced his run.
Unfortunately.
And one of the things when you analyze Strive, I know this is something that Sustainalytics or Morningstar did, but they actually didn't look at the director votes. They don't actually vote entirely with management. They vote out in a 2-to-1 ratio women on boards. They actually tend to find powerful women, and the data is showing us that they target powerful women and vote no against them. Now, they're so pitifully small as to not make a difference.
I'm glad you brought this up. Yeah.
But and then you have, and you wrote about this, the Microsoft proposal.
Yes.
The national,
unbelievable.
It does seem that there is a war, there's a very clever sort of underhanded war against any brown people, people who identify as women. It is a social construct to mask what you showed as the fossil fuel industry's funding of this. And I'm wondering if it's just a distraction. It might be the most brilliant distraction tactic ever.
Well, I think one of the things that drives me bananas, and that I've spent the last, when I think back in the end of my life in the pandemic, this is what I'm going to think about, because this is what I spent my time during the pandemic, is that the fossil fuel companies and other corporations have created dozens, possibly hundreds of these fake groups with names like the Franklin Institute or the National Center on Legal Policy.
Yeah.
And they're all funded by the same people. They are run by the same people. And they file comments with the government on rulemakings that appear to be coming from objective private think tanks that are absolutely bonkers. And with regard to the shareholder proposal that you're talking about at Microsoft, I was happy that Doug independently came to the same conclusion, and he wrote about it on his blog too. But yeah, it begins. If you just look at the proposal itself, it looks kind of legitimate. It says, we want to have some information about gender disparity in pay. You go, oh, okay. And then I said, I better look at that one. And so I look at it, and it goes into this thing about how it's unfair for women who decide to have children because they make less money. Well, you know what? That's a big societal problem. But it's not correct to say that there's an incentive to get an abortion.
And can I parrot something you said, Nell, on LinkedIn? Because to me, it's even worse than that, because it's the language they use is the most odious language I've seen to date. And this is from the National Legal and Policy Center. And the quote is from the proposal: women who choose not to abort their preborn children. I mean, and you also called out using the term transition in quotes. I mean, this is really the most insidious thing I've seen. It's just pure hateful theater. It's crazy.
It is absolutely despicable. And you have to say to yourself, who is behind this?
Yeah.
What is this in aid of for the National Center on Legal Policy or whatever it is? Really, well, first of all, I can tell you it's as I said in what I wrote, I'm predicting it will not get enough of a vote to qualify for resubmission.
Okay,
because holders are smart and they do read things. Yeah. It is.
We've been tracking these, and they're all like what, Matt? They're like below 1%. A lot of them, right?
Yeah. The average of these is abysmal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I interject one other thing? I did some research on this group this morning, and they have a section. This is the National Legal and Policy Center. They have a section, and this is to parrot your point, Matt, about targeting women and targeting people of color. They have a section on their website about their highlights, about the targets of who they're attacking, and they list 20 people since 1993, roughly. 11 of them are people of color. 8 are women. And since 2019, 5 out of the last 6 targets have been women of color. They are systematically targeting a specific. No, but I'm saying, like, that's the game, right? This is like, it's not an anti-ESG thing. They're going after a segment of our population. It's right there in their highlights.
And yet they call themselves the National Center on Legal Policy.
Yeah, white national, I suppose. I don't. Yeah, no, but seriously, like, it's right there in the data they present.
Yeah. No, they're and I in an attachment, an appendix to my testimony, I had a letter that I wrote to my old office at the Office of Management and Budget, which many people don't know this outside of Washington, but they are kind of the quality control on the conveyor belt of federal regulations. Everything has to go through them before it goes out. And that's a good thing because it makes sure that there's consistency between different regulatory agencies. It's a good deal. But anyway, I said to them, here are the names of some of these fake groups that you guys are giving credibility to and that you're meeting with. And you need to know who's behind it. What I recommend is that when federal agencies propose rules, because they have to propose a rule and get comments before they can make the rule final, that they should say, you don't have to tell us who's paying you to file this comment, but if you don't, we're going to keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, well, comply or explain, kind of. It's basically a version of that.
And the funders, if you look at SourceWatch, you can see who's behind the National Center. There are 2 groups that are like in the same office: the National Center on Legal Policy and the National Policy Center for whatever.
It's the same name, basically.
Basically the same name. Yeah.
And that's another thing. If I were spending $100,000 to fight shareholder proposals, I would have taken those 2 to the SEC and said, "This is the same group under 2 different names." Yeah. Knock it out.
Yeah, let's play the short game.
Okay.
Why don't we start with we'll stay in the ESG discussion. Let's go to the quick and dirty, nerdy, agree or disagree corporate governance game.
Catchy names all the time. This is what we do.
I was a writing major at Oberlin. I had to come up with things.
It sounds like it sounds like what you get at IHOP,
Yeah, it does. It does. It's the
Without
number
the
3
indigestion,
at IHOP.
or maybe with
Yeah.
the indigestion. I don't know. All right.
All right, go for it.
So here we go. Pretty simple, pretty nerdy. First one, disparate voting rights. The non one share, one vote. Should they just be completely banned?
Agree or disagree? Wow.
Agree or disagree?
That would be okay with me. My only caveat is that there has never been a world-class newspaper that didn't have dual-class votes.
Because of family? Because they're family control? Why is that?
Don't know. I just know that every newspaper that switched from dual-class to single-class tanked immediately afterward.
Is that right?
So I think that we have a societal interest in an independent media. So I would reserve that, and possibly as a transition, but I'm with the Council of Institutional Investors that said that companies that do go public with dual class should have to sunset promptly.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned media, because it really is media and now big tech, which really I guess is a modern day version of media. They're the ones who are most known for basically having fake public companies, right? They're controlled companies.
Big tech is a platform. They're not the media, right? Like,
Right,
they don't
but-
have the journalism.
Yeah.
Is that true, Matt? I mean, do you know how many stories we cover where they say that people now go to TikTok for the news? And so I don't know how true that is anymore.
Yeah, I mean, like a 14-year-old snorting, like a detergent pod is not the same as someone on the ground in
That's
Gaza
your future
right
surgeon,
now, right?
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, content creators. I think there is a differentiation between a content creator who can be a 12-year-old like doing TikTok dances and a journalist. And
Yes.
tech leverages like content creators and says they're providing information when the reality is they're not.
Well,
Yeah. Okay, there's a lot to say about that, but go on to your next question.
Well, this is something we talk about all the time. This is Matt. This is your favorite topic. Controlled companies. Companies like Meta platforms, as an example. Right. We call them here fake public companies.
Right.
What we're wondering is that should they even be allowed anymore to list on these exchanges? Like, why? I know there's a controlled company exemption, but why? And the question is here: should they just be considered private? Should we move on from controlled companies?
The record of those controlled companies over decades is not good. It's, again, that should be a transitional thing. It's exactly the same as the dual class issue. So buyer beware, I think, in terms of investors there.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is, I guess now, I mean, this was not the case when I started, in corporate governance 10, 15 years ago. But now what we have is we have these big data companies who are almost to a rule controlled companies, and they're the ones sort of guiding our culture into these, dystopic futures. So it's like now the issue becomes a little bit different, right? Because now we need oversight over Mark Zuckerberg in a way that, like, back in the day, talking about needing oversight at a chicken processing company was a little bit different, right? So the issue has changed, I think, which is why we harp on it a
also,
lot.
you can't avoid investing. I mean, like your average retail investor buys an ETF now. They buy the index, right? So they get put on the index and you're forced to have them and your vote doesn't matter. Right? Because so the gap actually to me is the buyer can't beware because the buyer is either not savvy enough to like set up their own full portfolio and manage it, X controlled companies, or they are savvy and they can do that, but they're moneyed and like they're gambling on those companies and that's their choice. And they tend to end up being the largest companies in the world and the backers of them, right? Like it's like all the VCs.
But I see a little bit of a pinprick of light at the end of that tunnel because I think that Musk's disastrous acquisition of Twitter has opened up possibilities for competitors. I'm on everything. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Mastodon. I'm on everything. Mm-hmm. And one like Post, where you can make micro payments to read news articles, I think is very promising. I think that, and I also think that Musk is learning that advertisers do not want to be surrounded by the kind of junk he's allowing on the platform. So I see a little bit of a potential there.
I'll say Musk is a fascinating case in general because he's like he's the example of me of ESG going right, because in the sense that you're seeing, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, you're seeing the public react to who he is as a CEO, how he treats his workers, how he, it's just the way how he treats all stakeholders, and they're pulling back from him, which really is kind of an analogy of the ESG world, like what you were saying about originally, about how you originally were just identifying risk, right? You're just kind of putting red flags and things, and that's, I think, where ESG gets things right with people like Elon Musk.
Meanwhile, Kimball's on the board.
You want to know where it's even righter than that is everybody's favorite guy on the witness stand, Samuel Bankman-Fried, because there couldn't be a bigger red flag than a company that doesn't have a board, doesn't have a CFO, doesn't have a risk officer, a risk and compliance officer. Nobody in the U.S. could possibly have thought about investing in him with any kind of rational assessment.
Right.
I'm in the middle of Michael Lewis's book.
I've read his book, which I love, and I disagree with a lot of criticism of it. And I'm now reading Number Go Up, which is the other book about crypto, which I'm enjoying very much. And I will send you guys the article I wrote about my ideas about crypto.
Great.
I love it.
Next question. This is one I can't find a lot of people to agree with me on this one. CEOs should be excluded from boards.
Oh, I don't think it would make any difference whatsoever.
Really? Why?
Yeah.
Huh.
There's a limit to structural changes, structural solutions. You take the CEO off as a board member, he's still going to be in the room.
Right, that's true. Right.
I'm going to say he's still in the room. He still controls the quantity, quality, and timing of the information they receive, and their access to other employees. So I don't think it would have any effect whatsoever.
Okay. It's one thing we don't talk about because we can't quantify it appropriately, but it is that it's who is also in those boardrooms, like who was at those meetings. We always talk about the emeritus chair and how ridiculous it is that they founded the company and they're sitting there staring at everybody. But you're right. Like, it's something I forget is that there are other people in those rooms who are not voting members who are making everyone else feel uncomfortable, right? I mean, that's just the way it is.
Yeah. You should talk to Doug Chow about that. He's been in the room where it happens.
Doug's coming back on the show. We can ask him.
Yeah.
How about this one? This is an ultra nerdy one. This is something that pissed you off, Matt, recently. There's this tendency at least in America, where boards, yes, there's the song and dance of the annual meeting voting on directors. But what they do is they appoint the director first to the board, and then they ask the shareholders to basically rubber stamp that appointment. So our question is, should we abolish this practice? Should the director? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Finally,
easy one.
someone agrees with me. It drives me bananas. You sign a contract with a person and put them on the board, and then like 3 months later, you're asking investors to approve it or ratify it, and it's like at that point, who's going to say no? You just so there's no slate anymore, right? Like you're not going to vote that person out. It's like, so proxy access actually, it's like a end around proxy access. Like, our board is full. We appointed the director.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about having a contested slates, like having directors instead of just putting up one director? What about putting up 2 directors for one slot? Do you like that as a solution? Having
the nominating committee put up 2 directors.
Yeah, for any slot, you have to do more than one. No.
My solution, as I said, is that no one should be allowed to serve unless he or she gets more than 50% of the vote, and that way we get to vote them off. But I don't think if the kind of people that serve on boards which is a whole other conversation. But the kind of people who serve on boards have no interest in subjecting themselves to something like that.
Really? Is everybody a snowflake? I had this dream with like John Lukomnik. I asked him about this. I was like, wouldn't it be great if everybody had to get up on stage and give like a stump speech, right? Like at the AGM, and then like investors are like, wow, I really like what, Jack's philosophy is, but the strategy that Jane had.
Ship has sailed, as you very well know.
I just can't believe it, like how delicate everybody seems to be. Like, no, they wouldn't subject themselves to that. Yeah, it's $200,000 a year, and you show up 3 times. I think you can handle like 4 questions before you get the appointment. I would hope.
I don't know how many meetings have you ever been to where you've asked questions of the board members directly?
Not enough. Honestly, not enough. I've been to some, but you're right. There's a lot of ego in those rooms that I've been in.
Yeah. To that point, do you think, Matt and I always argue about this, do you think that the younger generations are going to embrace like just the idea of this alternative democracy that is shareholder voting? And you do.
Another positive note, I think that the younger generation now is a lot more like, not like people think of baby boomers now, but like the baby boomers actually were.
Right.
Demonstrating in the streets, war in Vietnam, women's rights, voting rights, all of that, and anti-commercialism. I think this is the most anti-commercial generation since the baby boomers, and I think that as consumers and as investors and as employees, they've shown that they make climate change a priority. And so, yeah, I think I have a very positive feeling about them. We can just get a vote both on shareholder matters and on political matters. That would be great.
So, Matt, that's a win for me, Matt, on that one.
That's a win for you.
She's agreeing with me, Matt, on that one.
Yeah, well, because I honestly don't. I think they're too busy, like in their crypto wallets and their TikTok to pay attention.
But they like outrage, and this is a perfect sort of medium for outrage.
Got to manufacture more. Now, help us manufacture more.
They've in their lifetime, they've seen the institutions fail in a major.
Yes.
And so I think they have a lot of skepticism and a lot of idealism too.
Yeah, and this is direct access to that. I mean, we call it the alternative democracy, but this is direct access to having an input into things that they do care about and talk about quite often. Yeah. All right, Matt's telling me to rush to wrap it up. I have one more question.
I'm telling you, Nell has a life.
I know. I'm enjoying this. Okay, this is my final question of the day. Okay, so I keep kind of fantasizing about kind of reimagining the American board model and kind of modeling it after some kind of a version of a stakeholder capitalism, where instead of kind of randomly assigning board seats, that we have defined roles in the sense that, as an example, like, should boards have at least one employee representative? Like, should there, should there be, instead of just having a CEO from another company, should these seats mean something? Should they represent something, like represent some stakeholder constituent?
Like, this board seat was brought to you by the Hemsleys family, right? Like,
whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I mean, as a different way of attacking like the skills necessary for what these boards are trying to accomplish. Yeah. I mean,
it has never worked.
Okay.
Been tried. I'm certainly very open-minded about it, and my answer to you is it's a big, wonderful world out there, and the first corporation to step forward and say, this is our vision, this is what we're going to do, we'll let the market decide how that plays out.
I'm glad you said it like that, because I've been looking at these proxies for so many years. I've never seen actually a company reimagine its interpretation of what the board is, or everyone is sort of really doing the same thing, right? I mean,
well, as I said, boards have improved tremendously in terms of the quality of the people that are on them and the focus that they put on it in terms of the stock ownership of the board members. One of the first reports I ever did at ISS was a list of board members who didn't own a single share of stock.
Mm-hmm.
And you know who was at the top of that list? Enron.
Ah.
Well, they were busy selling off the stock.
Yeah. Anyway, so and at that time, Enron was everybody's darling. Everybody loved it. But if the directors don't want to buy the stock, then that should tell you the canaries are dying in the coal mine. So when I say to the extent it's been tried, I'm thinking about Germany, where they have the second board. I'm thinking about companies where the employees owned the company, like United Airlines for a while, and there was a mining company where the employees owned it, and all of them have turned out very badly. There have been companies where the ESOP owned the company, turned out very badly. So nobody's figured out.
Interesting. What makes the model bad in, like, say, Germany, for example? Is it just too many people in the boardroom? Like what?
The rhetoric is very, very far from the reality.
Okay.
The employee board has almost no authority.
They're muted. Okay. Yeah. No surprise. Okay.
So, yeah.
That's all I have, Matt. You want to wrap us up? You have any final words?
Now, this was awesome. Whatever moniker you want to go by, the godmother,
friend to the show,
of governance, the maestro of corporate accountability, whatever you like, movie mom, all the things. But I had, like, in the run up to this, I was thinking about, like, we should do games about, like, which movie characters that are
Next
billionaires would you vote against, or like what? Like I had, like, they're just
about corporate governance.
Yes.
Sweet is a classic movie. It's a Woman's World is a CEO succession movie. Those are movies from the 40s. And of course, I have a whole long list of corporate governance movies that.
I didn't know this.
See,
and
this is
one that you've never heard of. That is the one that I recommend the most often. It's based on a true story. It's called Owning Mahoney with Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Oh,
I already love it.
And it's a true story of the biggest bank embezzlement in the history of Canada. And it's the movie is a classic example about how every single person in the movie, the embezzler, the bank board, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police who are investigating it, the casino manager who can tell that this guy shouldn't be betting millions of dollars, but he is. Everybody's assessing risk all the time. And some do it better. The company, the bank turns down in the first scene of the movie. The bank turns down one of their biggest depositors for a loan, and she's the one because they're totally misassessing the risk because her account is about to be embezzled. So, so it's a wonderful, wonderful corporate governance movie, and of course, Philip Seymour Hoffman, absolutely terrific.
Great. These are all the places that we need to go next time. That's it. A huge thanks to Nell for joining us. We're definitely going to have her back again since Damien had like 35 questions he didn't actually ask her in that hour. This show today was brought to you by Free Flow Analytics, the only platform that you can get the data you can use to rate your director's performance, thus fulfilling Nell's lifelong dream of rating director performance. You can get that there. freeflowanalytics.com. Go check that out. We'll be back tomorrow to wrap the week. Until then, goodbye.